the Hoover Institution's report on day one, an economic contingency plan for a Taiwan crisis. The report highlights a sobering reality, which is that large-scale economic sanctions alone may not be enough to change Beijing's behavior, while potentially it could actually cause severe disruptions to the global community. Mm-hmm. If a Taiwan Strait crisis were to erupt sometime soon in the near future, what economic tools would be the most effective then in supporting Taiwan? And how can the international community help safeguard Taiwan's economy and its critical semiconductor industry?
Right, it's a very important question. Look, Xi Jinping has made it abundantly clear it is his intention to absorb Taiwan, to deny Taiwan the agency to determine its own future. And we have it within our power, a coalition of nations in this region and also elsewhere around the world, the United States, Europe, to ensure that we make it abundantly clear that the costs of doing that would be so high that China would hopefully make the calculation, Xi Jinping would make the calculation that today is not the day. It is within our hands, really, to determine that and to ensure that, you know, he is not tempted to pull the trigger. And so it's a multiplicity of things. It is about demonstrating that we have the unity across nations so that we made the mistake in Ukraine, for example, of where deterrence failed, of not demonstrating to Putin that the world would stand together against his aggression on Ukraine. I think he underestimated what he would unleash, and it's turned out to be very, very negative for him, but at tremendous cost for Ukrainians in particular, but also Russian soldiers who are being ground down there. So let us learn from that lesson and ensure that we have the military, political, diplomatic, and economic resources to signal to Xi Jinping, don't do this, because it will turn out very poorly for you. And so that's the ball in our court, and it's up to us to ensure that we do this.
I don't want to drag you too deep into domestic politics, but was it confusing then for, I guess, the U.S. when here in Taiwan, in our own legislative yuan, some lawmakers were they disagreed with our defense budget, and we therefore couldn't procure weapons from the U.S. Did it send a really confusing message to the international community on our own will to defend ourselves?
The practice of democratic politics is inherently confusing, and in particular, Taiwan's legislative yuan is I think, an extremely vibrant place in which passions are expressed, sometimes involving animal parts. But this is normal for a democracy. I think it's absolutely appropriate for a people to debate its own future and how to allocate its resources. So again, it is up to the Taiwanese people and the parties who represent them to determine the path forward for them. And the United States, I think, stands as a partner in helping them realize the future that they want to create. What I worry about is, and I work every day on this, is ensuring that we all stand together. You know, there is that saying that we hang together or we shall hang separately. Right. I don't know how to translate that into Chinese.
I'll try later. I'll try. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sure you will. But the point is really the family of democratic nations, as Sophie I think alluded to, is we inherently understand each other. We know what it means to be free, what it means to be able to express our own thoughts at a level that makes it, I think, easy for us to work together in a way that authoritarians, they don't trust each other. You know, North Korea, China, Russia, there is not that real level at society of working together. This is our strength, right? So what I worry about is and I work towards is to ensure that we mobilize and tap that strength so that we stand together, because I think together we will prevail.
That always, whenever I see the words together, that always reminds me of that scene in Planet of the Apes, or like apes together. Anyway, I just love that scene. I love that movie. Yeah. Some people argue that Taiwan can preserve peace simply by avoiding confrontation with Beijing and, accommodating China's demands whenever possible, based on you, because we were talking about deterrence, based on your understanding of the Chinese Communist Party and its strategic thinking, is that a realistic approach? And can accommodation actually provide security, or might it encourage even greater pressure from Beijing?
That's an excellent question. I mean, there's, the phrase the status quo, the political status quo or the geostrategic status quo. And it suggests a certain stability or stasis. But I think we've seen over the last 15 years, the status quo is actually a moving line. It was maybe a decade ago in which the PRC hardly ever, if at all, crossed the median line, right? Now this is an almost daily occurrence.
It is a daily occurrence.
And we accept it as the status quo, but it was not a decade ago.
It's the new normal now.
It is the new normal, exactly. So what we must, I think, be attentive to is not to cede the initiative to the PRC, not to allow them to define the terms of our existence. And so we spoke about togetherness. It is up to us collectively to say there are certain lines, in PRC parlance, red lines, that you should not cross. And to ensure that they clearly understand that as they try to communicate to us. I think that is critical. So hoping that the PRC will not tighten the noose to suffocate Taiwan, I think, is the wrong approach. I think the right approach is to say that we stand together to ensure that the PRC stays on that side of the fence.
Thank you for saying that. Anyway, thank you for saying that. When we talked about that red line, that the PRC's 红线, red line. Here's a question that I want to put to Sophie is, since the implementation of Hong Kong's national security law, I guess few cases have attracted more attention than that of Jimmy Lai. And you followed the case very closely for years. Why do you think, it's a rhetorical question, why do you think Beijing has been so determined to pursue him? And beyond Jimmy Lai himself, what message is the Chinese government trying to send through this case?
Well, actually, if I can tie these two things together, the human rights answer to the question that you just posed to Glenn, is essentially that, for decades, the Chinese government has not really had to deal with any unpleasant consequences for its unrepentant human rights violations at home.
Exactly, with impunity, basically.
And that, I think, in turn, has enabled or emboldened it to commit human rights violations in other countries. I think if there had been much stronger responses with real policy consequences to Tiananmen, for example, or to the mass arbitrary detention of Uyghurs, tick on down the list, we might be in a very different situation now. And I think it really is incumbent on democracies to accept that the direction of these trends over the years is one that they should be worried about and should prompt them to respond in much tougher ways. I think Beijing's pursuit of Jimmy Lai is not just about him and his activities, which were all, of course, perfectly legal, but I think it's also a test for other governments to see just how far Beijing can go to lock up somebody who's known globally, who published newspapers, is a vocal pro-democracy figure, to see whether other governments will really push back in response. And so far, I think the relatively anemic response of democracies to Jimmy Lai's detention is very worrying, especially because he's not in good health. He's not young. Nobody goes to a Chinese prison to get healthy. And it's such a powerful statement about how Beijing has changed Hong Kong over the last decade. If the idea that we would have been sitting here 10 years ago talking about the numbers of political prisoners in Hong Kong, really would have been, quite a stretch of the imagination.
That's right.
The fact that, layer upon layer of new national security legislation keeps getting imposed by Beijing in Hong Kong, in an environment that's now so heavily securitized, it's difficult to imagine anybody, mounting any sort of a threat. But that's not Beijing's point. It's that it's going to reserve unto itself the power to lock up anybody it doesn't like for saying things it doesn't like whenever it feels like it.
You know, now that we're talking about Beijing's goal or aim, many people assume that Xi Jinping's ultimate goal is the unification of Taiwan. Which, you know what? Let me rephrase that. It's not unification. I think it's invasion. That's one of the point when I do the news, our reporter would write, you know, Beijing's intention to unify Taiwan, I would cross it out and I would say invade Taiwan, because we were never, I guess, united. Like, anyway, to me it's invasion. Others argue that, you know, Taiwan is the only piece of a much larger ambition. From your perspective, what is Xi Jinping ultimately trying to achieve? Absorbing Taiwan, conquering Taiwan, that's all?
Well, so it's layered. For one thing, Taiwan, from his perspective, is a piece of unfinished business from the Chinese Civil War. And more importantly, it's something that no other Chinese leader, not even Mao, could solve. If he were able to absorb, not unify, but absorb Taiwan, it would put him above all other CCP leaders.
It would cement his legacy.
Indeed, that's right. And we've already seen he's elevated his own thought to the Constitution, to the level of thought, which only Mao has. This would put him ahead of Mao. So there is that. This is something that every Chinese leader has dreamed of, and if he were to realize it, wow for him. Okay, so there's that. But the second part is it changes the whole geostrategic environment of the Western Pacific. And for that, it means... right. And so it changes the context for Japan, for Korea, for the United States, obviously for Taiwan most acutely. And so it rewires the entire map of this part of the globe and the political influence that China would have. And it kicks the U.S. out of its position as a guarantor of international peace and security in this region. Which would change the relationship that Japan and Korea have towards China as well. So there is that as well. It is his sort of gambit for asserting dominance, hegemony in this part of the world. China's
hegemony. You know, China is facing significant economic challenges, from slowing growth to, you know, high youth unemployment. Do you think these pressures make Beijing more cautious when it comes to Taiwan? Or maybe the other way around, or could they actually increase the temptation to take risks abroad in order to strengthen domestic legitimacy? You know, make it more likely that Xi Jinping is going to wake up and be like, today's the day. These challenges, how do they influence Xi Jinping's thinking?
I think in his perfect world, there would not be an invasion, there would be a capitulation. He would make the costs of resistance so great that Taiwan would simply surrender. Choose not to fight. The United States would look at, you know, the costs of defending Taiwan and say, this is not a battle we want. That's within our power to prevent. So there are things we need to do today, tomorrow, over the next 10 years to ensure that does not happen. And that has to do with, you know, fighting in the information space to ensure that the PRC does not divide Taiwan internally. That Taiwanese people truly get to express their preferences, their genuine preferences, without interference from the PRC, whatever those may be, right? And so I think ultimately that's what he would prefer, not to have to fight, not for Chinese people to be seen to be killing other people of Chinese ethnicity. This would be extremely complicated. This would be politically very complicated, even for him at home. And so I think it's a situation he'd prefer to avoid.